Hello friends and welcome back to another Web Developer Path video. Today we are going to start learning PHP basics, and this is going to be a three-part video where we start with basics, and in the next one we will learn about form handling and superglobals in PHP, and in the third one we will learn the object-oriented programming with PHP. So a quick intro to PHP. It is an acronym for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor, and it is a widely used beginner-friendly server-side language, and it is used to build dynamic web pages by using PHP syntax inside our HTML. So of course, we use PHP for web development and to communicate with the database which is on our server. So we will learn about all of these aspects of PHP in these three videos. Now to install PHP on our machine, for example on Windows, we need a tool that can run Apache server on our local machine. So for that I'm going to use XAMPP, but there are other similar programs like WAMP or MAMP or even Laragon that can do the similar job. But again, I'm going to use XAMPP, and you can download it from apachefriends.org. So let's download it for our machine. So for me, it's Windows. I'm going to click on this one. And when that's done, I'm just going to run it from here. And so to install XAMPP, of course, we need to press text, and we want all of these to be checked. So we want all the features, and you need to install it in any folder except program files. So they suggest not to install it in program files because otherwise you would need to grant some permissions to it, and it just can get very complicated. So we're just going to press next on all of these options and then wait for the unpacking. Okay, so when the installation is done, I'm just going to untick this. Do you want to start the control panel? I just don't want to do it now. I want to press finish and go to the local drive where we installed it, and I have XAMPP down here. So inside the XAMPP folder, we have a bunch of other folders and files, but the ones that we need are this htdocs. This is where our projects would go. So when we want to create a project, we will create a folder inside this folder. And then we have our PHP folder, which contains the PHP executable file, and we need this to add it to VS Code. So VS Code can recognize this PHP. This is our PHP file. And of course, we have our control down here. So let's open this XAMPP control down here. And you should see a similar window like this one. Now, you might have green ticks on your services. That means the services are installed on your machine. For me, it's not. And I don't want to have it installed because I don't use the services anyway. I can run them as a program. So let's start our Apache server by clicking Start and MySQL. So this will fire off these two services for us, or these two programs. Then we can go back to the browser and just go to local host and press enter, and this will take us to the dashboard of XAMPP. So we have some links up here, and one of them is PHP My Admin. Let's click on that link, and this will take us to the databases. This is our interface to interact with databases to create, delete, or manage our databases, but we're not going to go through this one in this video. This will be for the next video where we actually communicate with databases through PHP. So let's go back and leave this as it is. Now to create our project, first we need to create a folder in htdocs, and I'm going to go inside that folder, and you can have this maybe create a shortcut of this folder or add it to quick access so you don't have to navigate to all of these folders every time. And I'm going to create a folder called PHP Basics. We need to open this in VS Code, and I'm just going to drag and drop it inside the VS Code. And next we want to add PHP. Now, before we do that, let's create a file here. Let's call it index.php. So not an HTML, but a PHP. Now, sometimes VS Code gives you a pop-up here that says you need to add the PHP executable path to your settings. And for me, it doesn't pop up, so I can go to the settings manually just by clicking on this gear icon and then go to settings. And in the search field, I'm just going to type PHP, and this is what I'm looking for: PHP executable path. If I click on this one, this will take me to that JSON file where I can include the PHP path. And that one is in XAMPP folder, PHP folder, and PHP application, this one. So I'm going to copy it. So I'm just going to copy the file, and back in VS Code, I'm going to paste it. This will paste directory or path for that executable file, this one. So we just have to change these backslashes to forward slashes. And that's it. That is for VS Code setting, and we can close the settings, and we have our index.php. So I'm just going to type a less than sign question mark PHP, and then down here I'm just going to say echo hello and end it with a semicolon. I will explain all of this in a second. So let's save this one. Now we have, if we go back to htdocs and inside our PHP basic, we have our index.php. So in our browser, if we navigate to PHP basics. So localhost PHP basics, we have our hello, which is coming from index.php. Let's put this side by side with VS Code, and that is how we can set up our PHP environment so we can start learning. So let's start with PHP syntax. I'm going to delete everything here and add some HTML. So let's say we have an HTML page just like this, and we want to add PHP inside of this. Right now we don't have any PHP. So in order to have PHP syntax inside HTML, we need to provide the opening tag, which is less than sign question mark PHP, and close it with a question mark greater than sign. And whatever we pass in here, it's going to be PHP syntax. So I want to say hello world and end it with a semicolon, and if I refresh we get hello world. If you are using PHP inside the HTML, you need to always close your PHP tags. So if I delete this one, this will give me an error. But if you have only PHP inside the PHP extension file, then you don't need to close it. And also when it comes to ending your statements, always use a semicolon. So that's the best practice. Even though if it's only one statement like this, I don't have to do it, but the best practice is to provide that semicolon at the end of every statement. So I'm going to cut this out and delete the HTML and paste this in. And as soon as I format my document, you can see the closing tag is gone because I don't need to provide that in a document that has only PHP in it. So let's see how we can make comments in PHP. We can make a single line comment by adding double forward slashes in front of the text, or we can do the similar thing with a pound sign. So these are both single line comments. We can have multi-line comments with a slash star and then some text or the comment and then end it with a star slash. So this is how we can make comments. To output data on the screen, we have a few ways. We can use echo keyword and say hello. Again, end it with a semicolon, and of course we get the text. Similar to echo, we have print. Now there is a tiny bit of difference here. With echo, we can output multiple values like this, and we do not get an error. But with print, we can only have one value, so this will give me an error. So this is echo and print. We also have print R method. Now this is used for printing arrays. So if we want to output arrays 1, 2, and 3 like this, we can use print R, and this tells us this is an array, and the index 0 is 2, index 1 is 3, and so on. We cannot use echo for arrays because that would give us an error. So if I want to echo this array here, it doesn't give me a fatal error, but it gives me a warning that says array to string conversion. So we use print R for arrays. We also have var dump, which is mainly used for debugging. So for example, if I comment this out and change this to, again, a string of, I don't know, hi. Now this gives me the type of the data as well as the length, if it's a string, if it has a length, and then the value itself. So if I pass, I don't know, 5.5, you can see it gives me float. So we will get to data types in a moment. And even if I pass an array like 2 and 3, you can see it gives me the type of the array itself, but also the values inside the array. We also have printf, and this is for printing formatted string. And we will talk about this when we get to string functions. Let's talk about data types. And I'm going to use var dump here so we can see the data type. So first we have a string, for example, hi. This is a string, of course. There we go, with a length of 2. We also have numbers. So 5, for example, is an integer, is a whole number. So we have whole numbers and float numbers. So let's change this to int, and this is to float, which is basically a decimal number. So let's say 3.5. And you can see the first one, this number 5 is an integer, and then 3.5 is a float, or basically a decimal number. So next we have booleans, which is basically true or false. So like many other programming languages, we have a boolean that says it's either true or false. And we've seen arrays already. So array is a collection of values, and it could be any value in here. It could be an int, it could be a float, for example, it could be a string maybe. Let's say turn this into a string, and let's comment these out. And you can see we have an int, a float, a string, and so on. Next we have null, which is basically nothing. So null. So if I refresh the page, it gives me null. Null means nothing, of course. We have two other data types here, but we cannot actually output it as an example because we don't have the right data. One is object and the other one is resource. So object is an instant of a class. So we don't have a class, so we cannot create an object. And resource is a type of resource. So we have an object data type in PHP that is a resource. And again, we get to these two data types in the third video where we talk about object-oriented programming. Let's talk variables and how we can create one. So in PHP, variables start with a dollar sign, and that's how we can create our variables. So let's say I want to create a variable name and set it to my name and end it with a semicolon and echo that name. Of course, we will get John. Now, there are few rules we need to follow when it comes to variables. All the variable names must start with a letter or an underscore. So this is valid. This is also valid, and this is also valid. So all of these are valid names, but we need to be careful because our user-defined variables are case sensitive. So let's do this, and you can see the variable name with a small letter n is not defined. Now, a variable name can contain letters, numbers, and underscore. So that means I can have first name like this with an underscore, that's fine. Even if I want to add a number here for some reason, that's also fine, but I cannot have dash. So that's incorrect, or a symbol, that's also incorrect. So only letters, numbers, and underscore. Okay, so we talked about this variable name case sensitivity, right? But in PHP, there are keywords like this echo that they are not case sensitive. So if I change this to CH, capital CH, and if I save it, it reformats the code, but this would not give me an error. So just keep in mind, you can see that the VS Code is not giving me any error because it is not an error. But when I save it, the formatter change it back to smaller letter. Just keep in mind keywords like if, else, echo, switch, and class names and function names are not case sensitive. And again, we will talk about this as we learn more and more about PHP. So let's talk about string functions. We have this string name here, and let's say I want to create another string here. Let's say age and set it to 32, just as an example. So if I say echo name and age, we already know what we would get. We would just get John 32. That's not what we want. We want to add something here. For example, name is age, right? So in order to concatenate a string in PHP, we can use dots like this. And so name, and then the string is maybe 2 spaces on each side, and then another dot. So this whole thing would become one string. This would work. This is working fine, but we also have an easier way. So let's comment this out, and down here again, I'm going to say echo. Now instead of using this syntax, I'm going to use the double quotation. This only works with double quotations, and then say name is age. So I just have to pass the variable name as they are. I don't need to provide anything. This is one way, so we get the same thing. Now, let's say you have a letter that is not part of the variable name right after this variable name. So I want to say names are 32. For example, I don't know, we have multiple users that are 32, and we want to say these names, and this S is not part of the variable. So what we can do, wrap this whole thing inside curly brackets. And this is being explicit about the variable name and saying this S is not part of it, or whatever that comes after these curly brackets. So if I save this one, we get the S as a string and the variable name is still the same. Let's talk about some of the functions that are available for strings. Let's use var dump so we get a better look at the output. And I'm going to delete this one, and I'm just going to var dump str length. So strlen gives us the length of a string. Now var dump itself will do the same thing, but if I pass name down here and refresh the page, of course, you can see it gives me int 3 because this str length, it returns the length of the string as an integer. So another useful function is strpos. So strpos, this gives us the position of the first occurrence or instant of a substring. So let's say in the string name, I'm looking for the letter O. and I want to get the first instance or occurrence of letter O in this string. So if I refresh this one, I get 1. This is saying that in the string John, the index of O is 1, because we know strings like arrays are 0-based indexed. So if I actually add something else here, for example, John likes dogs. So we have another O here. If I refresh it, this will not change because this only gives me the first instant. Now, if I want to get the last instant of O, I can say strr pose. And this gives me 11 because this is the 11th indexed. And this substring can be anything. For example, if I'm looking for, I don't know, JO, this should give me 0 because there's only one instant. Even though I'm going backwards, there's only one instant in this string that has JO substring and starts from index 0. Next we have str to lower, and I think that's clear what it does. It will turn every character inside the string to lowercase. Right now they are lowercase. Let's change this one, this likes, to all caps like that. And you can see it is outputting John likes dogs. Similar to lower, we have upper, which makes every letter uppercase. There we go. And we also have UC words. So UC word makes the first character of every word capitalized. There we go. So D and L is already capitals. So even if I change this one to a small l, so for some reason, you can see it is the same. Let's say I want to check if a string starts with a certain substring. So I can say str underscore starts with. Now, this takes two arguments. The first one is the string, and then I want to look for the substring. I want to see if it starts with JON, but J is capitalized here. Okay, so this should give me false because this starts with JON, but J here is a small letter. So if I change this to J like that, it gives me true. Similar to starts with, we have str ends with, and it checks if the string ends with a certain substring. So this will give me false because it does not end with JON, but if I pass an exclamation mark, this should give me true because the last character is an exclamation mark. Now, one of the most important string functions, I would say, is HTML special characters. So HTML special chars or cars or characters, I don't know how to read that, but this will turn every HTML character into a string. So instead of word dump for this one, I'm just gonna echo something first. So first, let's create a variable, call it str up here, and I'm going to actually set it to HTML tag. So I'm gonna say h1 and then close that h1. Up here says hi. So this is an HTML h1, right? So let's just get rid of that for a moment. Say echo str and save it. And of course, we will get an h1. And you can see we don't see the tags because the browser is interpreting those tags. Now, let's say instead of just passing str as it is, I'm going to wrap it with HTML special chars or cars. How do you read that? I don't know. Special characters. So if I refresh it, you can see now the tags are being actually outputted there. So what this function does, it will turn every symbol into a special HTML character. So if we inspect this site and go to the source and click on this PHP basic, you can see we have, instead of this less than sign, we see @LT semicolon and so on. So this is useful when we work with the forms, especially in the second video, we will use it all the time. And for example, let's say we have a bad string. A hacker is going to hack our website by passing a script, a JavaScript, into the form or a login form or a contact form or whatever. And let's say this is the hacker saying, alert the user and say, you've been hacked, for example. Now, again, if I comment this out and just echo that bad str, so if I save and refresh the page, I actually get the alert. So if this was a harmful script, it would damage our server or database or so on. So we need to actually wrap this with that HTML as special characters. And if I refresh it, you can see now it is not harmful anymore because now they are being interpreted as a text. It doesn't do anything. And similar to HTML special characters, we have HTML entities. Now this does the same thing. It's a bit different and it's too technical, the difference, so I will put the link to the documentation in the description. So we will use HTML as special characters and HTML entities in the next video where we work with forms. Now, since we are here, let's also mention that formatted string. Sometimes you have a raw string, let's say raw str, and set it to, for example, hello user, welcome back. Now, instead of this user, we want actually dynamic data. We want to inject dynamic data here. With formatted string, we can do that. We just have to add a placeholder. So for a string, we can use %sign and s for string. Now down here, remember we talked about printf very briefly. This will accept a string format. So we want to pass the raw string and then the replacement for that first placeholder. So let's say John and end this statement with a semicolon and refresh. Hello John, welcome back. So we can even have multiple placeholders. Let's say I want to say hello user, and then we'll come back. For example, another string down here for just for a test. I can't think of anything, but if I say PHP, this would go at the end of the string where the second placeholder is. So these placeholder represent these values that we are passing into the printf. So this would be useful when you are getting data from a database and you want to greet the users and loop over the data and then just pass a string or just output a string for every user. So that's about some of the string functions and concatenation. Now let's say you want to have constants in your PHP. Now constants are useful when you want to have a value that doesn't change and you want to use it in your environment, like your local host port or like your database username. And there are two ways to define a constant in PHP. One is with the define function, and this will take a string as the constant name, and usually they're all caps. For example, db name, and then the second argument is going to be the actual value. The db name, for example, is going to be php db, for example. So this would be my constant. And if I want to echo this one, if I want to see what is the name of my DB database, I can use the constant function here that would accept the name of the constant that we want to output. So if I just pass that DB name down here and refresh the page, we will get php underscore DB. So this could be anything. Again, this, for example, this would normally be used in your environment setup where you have all the data that is going to be unchangeable throughout your project. So that's one way to define a constant. We also have the keyword const we can use, and let's say we have a min age for our site that says it cannot be less than 30. So again, if I want to output this one, I can use the same echo constant min age and we will get 30. All right, let's talk about operators. So we have simple arithmetic operators. For example, 2 plus 2, of course, it's going to give us 4. So we have plus, we have minus, we have multiplication, we have division, and we have the modular operator and also the raise by power. So we already know 2 plus 2 is 4. This is going to be 0. Let's change this to 3. So it's going to be 1. This is going to be 4. This is going to be maybe 3. Let's do that. Let's just echo these, and you can see this is 3, 4, 1, 4. So again, very simple math operations. Now, if you are not familiar with modular or raised by power, so the modular operator divides the first operand to the second operand, and it gives us the remainder. So 2 divided by 2 is 0. So let me comment this out. It gives me 0, right? Now, for example, 7 divided by 2 is 3, but there is 1 remainder, right? And it gives me that 1 remainder. So if you want to get the remainder of a division, use the modular or remainder operator. And if you want to raise a first operand, which is this one, to the power of the second, you can use double asterisk or double star. So 2 raised by the power of 2, of course, is going to be 4. But if we change this, maybe let's change this to 4 raised by the power of 3. So it's going to be 4 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 4. That's we get 64. All right, so these are simple arithmetic operators. We also have assignment operators, and we've already seen the simple assignment. So if I have a num variable here, I want to assign it using this one equal sign to number 4. So now num is assigned to 4. So this can be mixed with arithmetic operators. So let's echo num down here, and of course we get 4. Now, if I want to add another 4 to it, I can say plus equal to, so num is 8 now. Let's say I want to take away 2 out of this and just reassign it back to the num. So what I'm doing here, I'm adding 4 to it and then reassigning it back. I'm taking away 2 and reassigning it back. You get the idea. This can go with any operator. Now let's say if I want to just add 1 to it, so let's go back to that simple 4 here. I want to just keep adding 1 to that num variable. So I want to get 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. So I can just use plus plus. Again, with many other languages, it's the same. So if I copy paste this one, you can see 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Refresh, there we go, we get 8. And if we want to decrement, so this is increment and decrement, now we are back to 6. All right, next we have comparison operators, and we haven't talked about conditionals yet, but we can just use simple examples here. So I'm going to var dump something here because we will get true or false because we are going to compare things to each other. So if I say is 2 equal to 2, this is actually assigning. Obviously, it's incorrect. So 1 equal sign is assigning, 2 equal sign is comparing. I'm saying is 2 equal to 2, and of course we get true. Now, if I change this to a string, we would still get true because even though this is a number, this is a string, we are not checking for the type. But if I add 3 equal signs, now we are actually checking for the type as well as the value. So this should give me false because even though the values are the same, but the types are not. So we have double and triple equal symbols for checking equality. And similar to this, we have not equal. So an exclamation mark, 1 equal sign. And let's change this back to a number 2. So I'm saying, is number 2 not equal to number 2? It's going to be false because they are the same. And if I change this to a string, it's still the same. But if I add another equal sign, now it's going to give me true because they are not the same. So 2 as a number is not the same as 2 as a string, so that is true. And of course we have greater than. So is 2 greater than 3? Well, that's false. Is it less than 3? So the other way around, yes. If I say, we can also say greater than or equal to. So if I change this back to 2, you can see this gives me false because 2 is not greater than 2, but it is equal. So greater than or equal. And again, similar to this one, we have less than or equal. So these are comparison operators. Now we also have logical operators, but we will get to those when we start with the conditionals. All right, let's talk arrays. So in PHP, we can define arrays in 2 different ways. Say I have an array variable here, and I can use the array function, and this accepts the values that I want to have in my array. So I want to have, for example, the string high, and then the number 23, and then maybe another array. I just want to show you this is acceptable. So we haven't talked about multidimensional array, which we will talk in a second, but I just want to show you it is possible. Okay, so let's var dump this array here and end it with a semicolon. And of course we get array with 1 string, 1 integer, and another array with 1 integer and another integer. So that's one way we can use the array function, or we can use the normal brackets or square brackets and pass the values just like what we did up here. So this would be exactly the same. Now let's say I want to get the first index. I want to get this high value out of this array. So I can pass the brackets inside the variable name and pass the index that I want to get. So 0, that would give me high, a string of 2 that is high. Now 1, it's going to give me 23. And if I say 2, it's going to give me the array that has 2. So if I want to get number 2 inside of this array, I can pass another curly brackets and say, so go to the index 2 of this array, which is this array, and then go to the index 0 of the second array and get that value, which should give us 2. There we go. So this is called a simple array, and the indexes are 0 based. So they are auto-generated and they are 0 based. We also have associative array in PHP, which is a very helpful array, and it is similar to JavaScript objects. So in JavaScript objects, we have key value pairs. In PHP, we have associative arrays. So I'm going to delete this one and press enter here. And for example, I'm going to have a name, and it's going to be associated with John. So this is what we use, a fat arrow or just an arrow. So we use an arrow to associate a value to a key. So, and then we end it with a comma, sorry for the semicolon. So let's say age is going to be 32, for example, a number, and pet is going to be dog. Now let's print out this array with for dump, and we get array of 3 where the name is a string that says John, age is 32, and the pet is dog. So if I want to access the name only, I can just say grab the name, and you would see associative arrays all over the big projects where we, for example, in future when we start learning Laravel and we build our database and we build a blog post, a full functional blog post, we will use these associative arrays all the time, and we will work with these in the next video as well, where we actually use databases. So you could have this similar syntax if you want to use the array method. So I'm going to cut this out and delete these square brackets and just use the array function again. Inside the parentheses, I'm going to paste that code. So again, it's the same, and we get exactly the same way. It's just a different method. So we also talk about multi-dimensions array, and I can, for example, change this back to that simple array. And let's say this actually is part of another bigger array. So I can wrap it with another curly brackets, and after that, let's just copy this array here. Let's just copy that one and add a comma after this array and paste it and format the code. So we get something like this. And this one, for example, is Mike, and it is, I don't know, 34 and likes cats. So now down here, let's just do array, and we get an array of 2 that has 2 arrays inside of it. Now let's say I want to get Mike, the value Mike on the screen. So I know I need to go to the second element. So the index of this one is 1. So this is not an associative array. This whole thing is a simple array. So this is 0, this is 1. And then when I'm inside this array, I have the name index or key, which I can pass it down here and refresh the page. We get Mike. This could also be an associative array if you wanted to. For example, we have person 1 that is going to be this guy, and then person 2 is going to be that one. So instead of passing number 1 here, I can just say person 1 name. It should give me the same thing. All right, let's talk about some of the array functions, and I'm going to turn this into a simple array. So just one array with multiple values. All right, so let's say I want to get the length of an array. I can use the count method and pass the array name, and I get 3. So the length of this array is 3. 1, 2, 3. So we can also check if a value is inside of an array. So I can say in array. So this is a method, and it takes the first argument is the value that you're looking for. I'm looking for 32. So the values, not the keys. And I'm looking for 32 inside the array variable up here. So this should give me true. It does exist. But if I say a string cat, this gives me false. So if you want to add to the end of an array, there are 2 ways. We can get the array itself and provide an empty curly brackets and set a new value here. So let's say I want to add, for example, red as a favorite color. And if I output this one, it's going to add an auto-generated index for me. So the key here would be 0, and then the string red. If I want to actually make the key manually, I can pass the new key here, say favorite color, and now we can see favorite color is added to that array and it is red. So this is one way. There's also a method called array push. Now array push takes the array that we want to work on as the first argument, and the second argument is the values that we want to pass into it. Now here we cannot pass associative arrays, so we just have to pass new values that we want to push inside the array, and the index will be auto-generated. So we get 0, integer of 23, 1 is 23, and so on. I just added 23 3 times. So array push adds the values to the end of our original array. And we also have array on shift if you want to add to the beginning of an array. So if I refresh this one, now these 23 numbers are in the beginning of our original array. If you want to delete a last item in an array, we can use array pop. So array pop takes only one argument, and that is the array name that we want to delete an element from the last index. So if I refresh it, you can see we have name and age, but we don't have the pet anymore. If you want to delete the first element, you can use shift. So this similar to pop, but it goes from a 0 index. So we have age and pet now. We also have array combine, which, as the name suggests, combines two arrays as keys and values. So it kind of makes associative arrays based on two arrays. So let's say I have an array called keys, and it's gonna be these keys here. So name, age, and pet. And I'm going to change this one to vals or values, and I can delete these keys here and reformat the code. So we have two arrays. Now I want to combine these two and save it into another variable. Now let's call this one our arr, which is var dumped here. And I want to use array underscore combine. This takes two arrays, so the keys and the values. Now we need to make sure that these keys and values have the same count. So they have the same number of elements in both of them, otherwise we will get an error. So let's delete this one and save it, and we get our original array where we actually hard-coded. Now it's combined using these two arrays where the keys are from the first array and the values are from the second one. Now, if you're familiar with JavaScript, we also have higher order functions, and two of the most used ones are map and filter. So let's change this to something very, very simple. So I want to change this to an array of numbers. Let's say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have an array of numbers. I want to map over it and return another array. I want to create a variable new array and use the array underscore map. Now this takes the callback function and then the name of the array. So we haven't talked about functions, but for now let's just add the function here. We can use kind of an anonymous function that we have in JavaScript. We can use the similar one here. So the syntax is like this. We have the fn keyword and then the element, which we want to represent every element in our array, and loop over that one and use the arrow function or arrow syntax. We want to say map over the array, and for each element, let's say element plus 2. So add to it. Now, as the second argument for this map function, we need to pass the name of that array that we want to map over it. So nums, and let's var dump that new array. All right, so let's refresh this site. So at first we have 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we are adding 2 to each element. So 2 is 4, 3 is 5, and so on. So similar to array map, we have array filter that does a similar job, but based on a condition. So I'm going to copy paste this one and comment this out. And instead of array map, I want to say array filter. So array filter takes the name of the array first and then the callback function. So we want to loop over the nums array, and we want to return a new array where each element is greater than 5. So we should get an array of 6, 7, 8. Let's see what we get. There we go, 6, 7, and 8. Because we set greater than 5, even though 5 is here, it is not greater than itself. So if we say greater or equal to, then we get 5 in there. So these are some of the array functions, and I will put a link to the documentation for these array functions in our description. All right, let's talk about conditionals in PHP. And like many other programming languages, we can have conditional statements using if keyword. We have the if keyword, and then inside the parentheses, we have our condition. And if this condition evaluates to true, this block of code will be executed. Let's say our condition is true, and then I just want to echo true. So if I save this one, we get true, of course, the text true. But if we change this to false, we would get nothing, because we are not saying what happens if the condition was not true. For that, we can provide an else block. The else block will execute if this condition is false or evaluates to false. So if I echo this one, you can see we get false. So for example, if I want to check if 2 equals to 2, then we get true. If you want to check is 2 equal to 3, of course not, so we're going to get else. And there are cases you want to check for multiple conditions. You can chain else if blocks. So let's say I want to check else if 2 is greater than 4, then I will echo 2 is greater. So let's save this one. We get false again because all of these conditions are evaluating to false, so we are falling into the else block. Now let's change this one to 1. That means this is going to evaluate to true. So now we get 2 is greater. So we can chain as many else if statements as we want. We talked about operators before, but we couldn't talk about logical operators because at that point we didn't talk about conditionals yet. So I'm going to delete this else if and just have a simple if and else statement. So for this example, let's create an age variable. Let's set it to 30 and we want to check if age is greater than 21 and age is less than 60, then echo true. Otherwise, echo false. So in this case, we are checking for two conditions and both of them evaluates to true. When we use the keyword and, the conditions all must evaluate to true. So if even one of them evaluates to false, then this whole block of code will be false. So let's change this to 61 and we would fall to the else block because even though age is greater than 21, but it is also greater than 60, which is making this condition false. So that's the first logical operator, the keyword and similar to that one, we have the double ampersand. Now this is exactly the same. The only difference between this double ampersand and the keyword and is that this one has a higher precedence. So all of the operators have precedence in PHP, and this double ampersand has a higher precedence than the keyword and. Next we have or. So we have the keyword or, then also the double pipe, which is similar to or. Then again, this double pipe has a higher precedence. Now this one is like and, but only if one of these condition evaluates to true, then the whole statement is true. So if I refresh this one, we get true because even though this is wrong, this is false, but this is true. So with or logical operator, we check only one condition must be true. So we also have XOR, and this one checks if either this one, the first condition, or the second condition is true, but not both. So right now, this age greater than 21, this condition is true, this is not true. We should get this one. Right now, it's acting like or, right? So we get true. Now, if I change this to 50, this is true, this is also true, we get false. So even though both of these conditions are true, we are falling inside the else block. So this would only evaluate to true if either of these conditions are true, but not both. So this is not the most common logical operator, but I thought I would mention it. We also have not operator. For example, if I just want to check if age has a value in it, so I can refresh, I get of course true. If I change this to null, we get false because age is nothing. Now if I provide an exclamation mark just before this variable and save it, we go back to true because now we are negating this expression. So we are saying is age not null? So double negative and we get true. So this is useful when you want to check that if the array is not empty or if the value is not null and so on. So those are the logical operators. Let's talk about the switch statement, and I'm going to put this back to 30. A switch statement is useful when you have a lot of cases that you want to check, a lot of conditions. And the syntax is like this. We have the switch keyword, we have the parentheses where we would pass the variable, in this case it's age, and then we have cases where the value of this case would be our condition. So I want to check if the age is 16, then I want to say, for example, you can drive. Then I can copy paste this case a few times and then say if the age is 21, you can drink. If the age is, I don't know, 30, you can fly. Just as a silly example, but these are the cases, and if none of these cases evaluates to true, then we have a default block, which is kind of like the else block, and we can execute something here. So if the age is not 16 or 21 or 30, we want to say sorry. We just want to say sorry. I refresh this page, we get you can fly because the age is actually 30. So this would check for the exact value. So if I pass 29, then it says sorry. If I pass 16, it says you can drive, and so on. We also have a ternary operator. So if I bring back that if statement and say if age greater than 21, and then echo true, otherwise false. I want to turn this into a ternary operator because this is a simple if statement. So I want to say echo. After the echo, I want to add the condition. If age is greater than 21, then what's going to happen? We want to say you can drink, but if it is not true, then we want to say sorry. So let's comment this out and let's refresh. So right now, age is null. So let's actually put something here. Let's put 12. And of course, we get sorry because it is less than 21. Let's put 22 because even 21 would evaluate to false. Then because it's 22 greater than 21, so you can drink. So a ternary operator takes the condition and then a question mark. Now, if the condition is true, whatever goes after the question mark will be executed. If the condition is false, then whatever goes after the colon will be executed. Now, we could also save the return statement into a variable or just echo it out or use it in our application, just what we are doing here. And the last one in conditionals is the coalescing operator or a null operator, which is basically just a double question mark. Again, let's change this back to null. And I want to check if the age is null, then do nothing. Otherwise, give me the value of age. So I'm going to delete all of this and echo age for the start. We get nothing on the screen, right? I don't want this. I want to actually get the word nothing. So I can use double question mark and then provide the text nothing here and refresh, and then we get the text nothing. But if the age has some value in it, whatever rather than null, then we would get that value. So again, this is useful when you are working with databases and you want to make sure that the data you're getting from the database is not empty, then do this. Otherwise, don't break my application and give me something else. Give me a text, give me an error or something like that, but don't break the application basically. And that's about the conditionals in PHP. Now let's talk about loops. So the first one is a while loop, and it is very similar to most of the programming languages out there. So a while loops checks a condition, and as long as the condition evaluates to true, it's going to run this code. So let's say echo run. This is a boilerplate. We don't have this a element. So we can provide it up here, a, and set it to 0. And down here we say while a is smaller or equal to 10, echo run. If I save and run this code, this will go into an infinite loop because at all times this condition would evaluate to true because we are not saying to add to this a at any point. So after our echo, we can say a plus plus. And remember, this is incrementing it and we are adding to it. So let's do that. Refresh, run 10 times. I can actually add HTML here, a BR or a break line after each echo. So we would get that. So let's actually output a instead of that run, and we get 0 to 10. So that's nicer. So that is a while loop. Similar to while loop, we have a do while loop. It is very similar to while loop, and the syntax is like this. So we have a do block which will run regardless of the condition. So a do while runs at least once, whatever the condition is. So again, we have the same condition as long as a is less than or equal to 10. But here now I want to echo that a with a break line. So let's save it. Okay, so you can see I forgot to add 1 to a and I went to an infinite loop. So my code kind of broke. So let's add 1 to a in our do block and save it and refresh. So we still get the same thing. However, if I come here and change this to 11, we get that 11 because it ran one time, even though the condition was false, but the code ran one time. So do while runs at least once. All right, next we have the famous for loop, and many programming languages have this for loop, and we have a counter. So in this case, we call it I and set it to 0. So we don't need this anymore. And we have our condition. We want to say as long as I is smaller than 10, then we are incrementing it. So now everything goes inside these parentheses. Before with the while loop, it was kind of, scattered in left and right and up and down, but now it's all organized inside this code. So we can say echo, this time we want to echo I, and then provide a break line, then end the statement and save it. And again, we get 0 to 9. Now here we are not checking equal to 10, otherwise we would get number 10 down here too. So that is a for loop, very simple. And of course we have a for each loop. Now let's say we have an array here. So let me create a simple array. Let's just start with a simple non-associative array. So I'm going to say 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So the even numbers. And I want to loop over this and output something for each element in that array. So I can say for each and get the boilerplate. I want to say for each variable as key value. So this variable is actually our array. So I want to say go inside the array, and for each element, I'm just going to call it element, in the array, do something. So again, echo that element with the break line. So we should get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So the first argument in this parenthesis is the name of our array, and the second one is our iterable. So we want to iterate over this array and get the values out. So let's refresh this site. We get, of course, the values. Now, if you have an associative array, so let's change this one to an associative array like this. What I want to do, I'm going to first of all comment this out. I want to get the keys as well as the values. Now, the boilerplate actually gave us what we wanted. We want to loop over this array, and we want to get the keys and each value. So we use the same syntax that we use up here. So we want to associate the keys and values, and down here I can use the same thing. I can say for each key print something like this. So exactly like the array. So value and then a break line. Let's see if this works. There we go. Name John 832 and so on. So we will use this for each almost all the time when you work with databases and forms and things like that. So one last point about loops is the break and continuous statement. So I'm going to create a for loop here, and we're going to set it I, and I is going to be less than 5 and yada yada yada. So let's just echo that I. So of course we get 0 through 4. We want to check something here. So let's say we have an if statement inside of our for loop, and we want to say if I equals to, let's say 2, I want to stop there, then break. And remember, we had this break statement inside our switch. So this is the same thing. This goes inside the loop and goes over these numbers, and it goes to 0, 1, 2, and then comes to this condition and says, okay, now I is 2, so I'm going to break the code. So we get 0, 1, because we are saying if it's 2, then break it. Don't even print it, just break it. Similar to this break, which breaks the code, breaks the loop, we have continue. So if I change that break to continue, you can see we are skipping over that number. So we are saying if this evaluated to true, then skip one iteration and then go to the next one. So we are skipping one iteration using the continue. All right, that's about loops, and now we're going to talk about functions. Let's talk about functions as our last topic for this video. So a function is basically a block of code that can be run over and over again, and it is one of the crucial parts of every programming language. Now in PHP, a function can be declared with the keyword function, and then the name that we want to use, let's say greet, pair of parentheses that can accept parameters, but for now we're just going to leave it empty. And then the block of code. What is going to happen when someone calls this greet function? We want to echo hello. This is the syntax. This is the simple function and how we declare it. Now to call a function or invoke it or execute it, whatever terminology we want to use, we need to use the name and use the curly brackets in order to execute it. So if I save and refresh the page, we see hello. So if I don't use that one, you can see this gives me error. So we have to remember that one. And before we get any deeper, we have to learn about the scopes. So in PHP, we have 3 scopes. So let me write this down. We have global scope, we have local, and we have static. Now, a global scope is a variable that is outside of a block of code. And this is a block of code inside a curly bracket. So let's say I have a num here, set it to 10. Down here, let's say I want to echo num. We already know how this would work, so we just get 10, of course. This hello is coming from the function. Now, instead of using it outside of this function, I want to access the num inside the function. So this is a global scope. So let's just add here global variable. So to access that global variable here, we can't just say hello num. because this num doesn't exist. So if we save this one, it says undefined variable num. We have to actually grab that num. There are two ways actually grab the global variables. One is to use the keyword global. So I can say global num, and that's all I have to do. And end the statement. This is how I grab that global value, and you can see the error is gone. So if I refresh, we get hello 10. Now there is also a super global that is called globals. So if I say num equals 2, so again, we will talk about these super globals in the next video, but I just want to show you because we are talking about globals. This will return an array of all the global variables in our document. So I want to grab that num. So you can see this gives me the same thing. So if I change this to 12, this gives me 12. But again, this is a super global and we will talk about it in the next video. For now, we will use this global keyword. Now we also have local variables. So let's say in here I have an age variable and set it to 32, and down here I want to output age. Of course, we will get 32. We don't need this global num anymore. This is a local variable, so down here if I want to echo age, of course it doesn't exist because this undefined variable. So local variables are only accessible inside the block of code where they are declared. And then we have static variables. So let me create another function here. So I want to function add, for example, and what it's going to do, we're going to create an a, set it to 0, and then say a plus plus, and then return that a. So most of the time, functions would return something rather than to execute a code. And I just wanted to show you, we will talk about this return statement more. So I want to echo the output of this add. So I can echo add like that. So execute the function or invoke the function using the parentheses. And let's save it. And we get 1. Let's save it again. 1. Let's add more. So we still get 1. The problem is every time I'm calling this function, this a variable is set back to 0. So we can turn this into a static variable by providing the keyword static behind it. And let's save it now. So if I call it 3 times, we get 1, 2, 3. So a static variable, a static scope, it keeps the value, it saves the value, it doesn't let go of the value that is assigned to it. So I'm calling this one, which is 0 at first, and then it adds 1 to it. So now a is 1. And because it's a static, it doesn't let go of that value. And that is a static variable. So these are the scopes that can be useful in PHP. So let's delete most of these and maybe keep that one for now. Delete these. And I have, don't worry about deleting these. I have a notes file which explains all of this in one text file, and that would be in GitHub repo. So again, down here, we have our greet function that would just simply says hello. Now, most functions, again, like I said, return something instead of executing the code. So they return a value so we can use it later on in our application. So if I echo greet, I should get hello, of course. Now, let's say I want to actually greet a user. So I want to say hello user or name or username. So I need to accept a username in this greet function. So I can pass parameters inside my function declaration. When we are declaring a function, the values we are passing into these parameters are called parameters. And then when we are calling it, they are called arguments. So down here, I want to pass an argument to this greet function. So I want to say this is going to be John. PHP is not type specific. There is a way make it type specific, but most of the time we don't provide the type. So anyway, if I execute it, it says hello John. So we are accepting an argument. If I don't provide anything though, we get a fatal error because the function expects a username, but we are not passing anything into it. In order to avoid these problems, we can have default parameters for our functions. So for example, this greet function says hello username, but what if username doesn't pass anything to it? We want to say, just say user. So we assign a username to a default parameter or a default value, to default value. And then if I save it, it says hello user. But if I provide something, this will override this user and gives me whatever I pass into this function. So this is a function with parameters and specifically with default parameters. Let's have another example. So we have an add function that would take x and y, and by default they are going to be 0. So if the user doesn't do anything, it's going to be 0, and all I want to do, I want to return x plus y. So down here, if I just say echo add, and we will get 0 because 0 plus 0 is nothing. But if I add the values here, I get 7, of course. Now, there are cases you don't know how many arguments the user will pass into your function, so you can accept as many as you want. And for that, we have a spread operator. Now, in PHP, it's not actually called a spread, but from other programming languages, we know this is a spread. So 3 dots, and then the name of a variable. So in this case, x. If I just return x and see what we get, and instead of echo, I'm going to use var dump because I actually know what we get. So let's say add and just pass 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers, just bunch of numbers, and see what we get. We get an array of numbers. So basically we are saying we are accepting any number of values and save them all into an array. So for example, if you want to do anything on this array, we can use the array functions. So we talked about map and we talked about filter. Let's use another one. Let's use array reduce. Now this is again like reduce in JavaScript. It takes 2 parameters and it does some operation on those 2 and kind of iterates over them. So first we need to pass the X array, right? So the name of the array, and then the callback function. So we haven't talked about this anonymous functions yet, but we will in a moment. But we can use, let's just use the normal function. So I'm just going to pass in function. We're going to take A and B. I'm sorry, I forgot the dollar signs. Just keep going back to JavaScript. All right, so we want to just maybe add A to the B and then return it and end the statement. All right, so the reduce function takes A as the first or the previous element and B as the next element in the iteration. So first is 3 and then 4, right? So it gets 3 plus 4 is 7. Now it has the 7 here. So now 5 to 7 is 12 and so on. So let's save this one and refresh. We get the total number of all of this in an integer because we are adding all these values together and save it inside one value. So again, this reduce function iterates over an array and does some operation on each element. In this case, we are adding them all together and returning that one value. So this is called a spread or the rest operator. Again, coming from other languages, those are the terminologies we use. Now, keep in mind when you are accepting this rest or the spread or whatever we want to call it, it should be the last one. You cannot have anything after this. You cannot have another parameter after this rest operator. Let me just comment this out, and I'm going to return x for now and do this. So you can see we get a fatal error because we cannot have anything after this rest or spread operator. We can have parameters before that. That would work. That's not a problem. We would still get our array, but the first value would be assigned to y. So you can see we start from 4 here because this is now y and we are not returning it. So keep in mind, if you are using this, it has to be the last parameter in your parameters list. All right, let's talk about anonymous functions or arrow functions. We saw a glimpse when we used the array functions with map and filter. And basically, instead of using this function keyword and the return statement, just like JavaScript, we can avoid all of this. So I'm going to put this back the way it was. Now, in here, instead of the function keyword, we use the fn keyword, and we accept our parameters if we want to. If we don't, we can just leave it empty. Now, we don't provide the curly brackets, so we can delete that, and the return keyword, we can also delete that. So let me put this all in one line. And of course, after the parentheses, we add the fat arrow or arrow function. We don't need this anymore. We don't need the semicolon, and that's we go, because that was before we were returning it, and that was a statement, so we had the semicolon. Right now we are saying this is our callback function in just one line. So we can have anonymous functions like this, or we can declare our own arrow functions. Let's say I have a greet variable. I'm going to set it to fn. Let's take a name, and return hello name. So in here, even if you use the curly brackets, you must end it with a semicolon because now you are assigning an expression to a variable. So if you are using arrow function like this to declare your own arrow functions, make sure you are ending it with a semicolon. So if we echo that greet and pass John into it, and let's get rid of this one, that's the number, and we get hello John. So this is our arrow function, and it's just like arrow functions in JavaScript. It's just a different syntax. We have this fn keyword. In JavaScript, we don't have it. It is very useful when it comes to callback functions inside the array or other methods, other functions, sorry. So these were all the topics that I wanted to cover for the basics of PHP. And in the next video, we will get into form handling and superglobals, and also communicating with the databases, and build a tiny little project, a blog project, for example, so we can submit data to a database and read from it and so on. So I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and I hope it has been helpful. I want to thank you all for your likes, subscribes, views, shares, and everything, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.